If you have ever experienced severe instability during a flight, with flickering lights and belongings shaking violently, you know just how deeply disturbing it can be. However, try to visualize this. Once the turbulence ends, the aircraft regains its balance and lands smoothly at its destination. The real shock comes upon disembarking, when a staff member informs the passengers that exactly 37 years have passed since takeoff. This premise sounds like the plot of a science fiction movie, doesn't it? Yet, from this moment on, you will dive into the details of an aerial journey that experienced precisely this phenomenon. This is the Fatos Entre Mundos channel. It's a pleasure to have you here. Subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this, and support our work by leaving a like. It really strengthens the channel. Our narrative goes back to July 2nd, 1950. It was a typical summer day, with clear skies and no meteorological indication that the weather would change drastically or bring astonishing revelations to the 57 people on board Pan American World Airways, Pan Am, Flight 914. The plane carrying this group departed from New York City, with 4 additional crew members bound for Miami, Florida. It is highly likely that the vast majority of those passengers were planning to enjoy some time off on the region's famous beaches. What none of them could have imagined was that there would be a chronological interruption of several decades in their lives. In the early stages of the trip, everything proceeded with perfect normality, and that sense of calm remained for those inside the cabin. In reality, the complication actually began for the individuals on the ground monitoring the aircraft's movement. Approximately 3 hours after takeoff, in a sudden and almost inexplicable manner, the flight simply vanished from radar screens. Command tower operators in both New York and Miami completely lost communication with the captain. When cross-referencing technical data, the conclusion was terrifying. It was as if that plane had never even crossed the skies. As with all incidents involving missing aircraft, security forces and relevant authorities worked incessantly, day and night, seeking to solve the enigma or, at the very least, locate fragments and debris. Anguish took over the families waiting in the airport lobby, while search teams scoured vast areas of the Atlantic Ocean in a desperate attempt to find any sign of survivors or wreckage. The total absence of oil slicks on the water or floating lifeboats created a void of answers that would haunt investigators for a long time. At that moment, the world believed it was facing an unexplainable tragedy, unaware that the true mystery was only beginning to unfold within the fabric of time. In a short time, authorities accepted the hypothesis that the aircraft had suffered a catastrophic failure and plummeted, resulting in the loss of everyone on board. Since the flight path crossed a vast stretch of the Atlantic Ocean, the primary assumption was that the wreckage rested deep within the sea. However, despite exhaustive efforts to detect any sign of life or debris, absolutely no evidence was found. They located no black boxes, no human remains, no fragments of the fuselage, or even personal belongings of the travelers. The most logical deduction at the time was that the plane had indeed submerged, as there were no reports of crashes or impacts on solid ground. Pan Am eventually issued an official statement confirming this theory, though the company's representative could not provide precise details regarding the exact circumstances of the event. And while it was impossible to mend the grief over the disappearance of 61 people, the airline paid out indemnities to the families for their losses. Thus, after countless sweeps by the Coast Guard, the investigation was officially closed. However, our narrative now moves 37 years forward, jumping directly to May 21st, 1992. It was just another routine workday for the air traffic controllers at Caracas Airport in Venezuela. On that specific date, a man named Juan de la Corte was in charge of operations in the command tower when, to his total astonishment, an obsolete-looking aircraft suddenly appeared in the airspace. We understand we are talking about Flight 912, but try to visualize what Juan felt as he watched a Douglas DC-4, a model originally produced in the 1940s, beginning its approach to the runway. At this point, versions of the event vary. Some testimonies suggest the plane was invisible to radar, manifesting visually only when it was already in the sky. Other sources maintain that the controller's shock began even before visual contact, as an unexpected blip suddenly appeared on his monitoring equipment. The atmosphere in the control tower transformed instantly from boredom to absolute tension, as operators tried to verify if this was a mirage or a real intrusion. The silhouette of that flying relic cutting through the modern clouds looked like a glitch in the timeline, defying all aeronautical logic of the era. Juan de la Corte, with trembling hands on the radio, desperately tried to establish a communication frequency that would make sense to a pilot who, theoretically, belonged to a different age of aviation. In front of the monitoring devices, regardless of any logical explanation, Juan and the rest of the staff in the command tower watched the scene in a complete state of shock. The incredulity was so great that they felt forced to review the technical data multiple times, desperately searching for a glitch that could justify such an anomaly. However, the aircraft's archaic design and its unexpected materialization were only the beginning of a much deeper mystery. Through the radio waves, the commander of Flight 912 transmitted a message heavy with anguish to air traffic control. Where are we? What is actually happening here? Promptly, Juan clarified that they were beginning their approach to Caracas Airport and took the opportunity to ask what their original flight plan was. The reply was baffling. We are Pan American World Airways Flight 914, en route from New York to Miami, with a crew of 4 and 57 passengers. This statement left Juan even more stunned, as that plane was over 1,000 kilometers away from its planned route. Trying to maintain his composure, the flight controller questioned the pilot, assuming a grave navigational error had occurred. He inquired if the plane needed immediate support, or if they were facing severe mechanical failures. There was an agonizing silence before the answer came. When the audio finally returned, the words were so impactful that Juan almost lost his balance, saved only by the fact that he was sitting in his chair. The pilot declared that the operation was scheduled to land at Miami International Airport at exactly 9:55 a.m. on July 2nd,
The operation was scheduled to land in Miami.
The dilemma now was how to communicate reality to those people without causing a mass panic. The controller took a deep breath, asked everyone to maintain emotional control, and delivered the devastating news. Captain, you are in contact with Caracas Airport. Today's calendar marks May 21st, 1992. Utterly distraught by what he had just heard, the pilot mustered his last remaining bit of focus and began the landing maneuvers. At that stage, an emergency unit was already strategically positioned on the runway to assist with the descent. Over the radio, behind the commander's voice, the sound of screams and the growing despair of the passengers was clear. On solid ground, a contingent of security guards waited to escort the occupants to a secured zone, a procedure they believed would be executed without major incidents. However, as the agents approached the aircraft, which was still taxiing slowly down the runway, the tension only escalated. The atmosphere on the tarmac was pure electricity, where the sound of the DC-4's vintage engines contrasted violently with the modern technology surrounding the strip. The ground officers exchanged confused glances, noticing that the fuselage's paint looked pristine, as if it had just rolled off the factory line in the mid-50s, without any signs of wear from time or weather. As the landing gear creaked against the hot Caracas asphalt, a sense that the laws of physics had been violated hung over everyone present, leaving the rescue team hesitant to take the next step and open that door, a door that seemed to lead directly from the past. The air traffic controllers picked up more desperate screams over the radio frequencies. This time, however, the voice belonged to the captain himself, shouting with urgency, "No! Stay back! We are leaving immediately." The tone of his voice made it clear that this was no stunt or joke. Without wasting a second, the pilot revved the engines, taxied the aircraft toward one of the runways, and took off, abandoning the airport without waiting for any official clearance. This extremely risky maneuver left everyone present perplexed, with a massive question mark hanging over what on earth had just happened. As Flight 915 gained altitude, 3 Venezuelan Air Force fighter jets were scrambled to track the plane. However, just like what had supposedly happened before that brief and strange layover, the radars were unable to detect the aircraft. It's important to remember that we are talking about a commercial airliner carrying 57 passengers, a large, visible object. And yet, the military was unable to locate it. If you think the mystery ends here, you are dead wrong. Another detailed report on this incident indicated where the aircraft was seen again, providing data that raised even more questions than answers. Just a few hours after taking off from Caracas, the plane finally landed at Miami International Airport. It was exactly 37 years late, but against all laws of logic, it appeared on the tarmac. At that moment, it was the turn of the staff and security personnel in the United States to be in total shock. The questions were inevitable. How did that aircraft manage to land there under those conditions? Where had this plane been wandering for the last 4 decades? These were just a few of the questions raised immediately after everyone on board disembarked. Both the crew members and the passengers were reportedly subjected to exhaustive interrogations that lasted for countless hours. It's impossible not to draw a parallel between this account and the plot of the TV series Manifest, don't you think? And the analogies don't stop there. Just like the show's protagonists, the occupants of Flight 915 didn't appear to have aged a single day since they took off back in 1955. Could a time displacement phenomenon have occurred? A wormhole, perhaps? I have the answers. Several media outlets explored this event, spreading various conspiracy theories. However, upon closer inspection, it is possible to find the original source of this story. A tabloid called Weekly World News. But make no mistake, this is no ordinary newspaper. It is a media outlet specialized in publishing satirical narratives, tall tales, and baseless speculation. In fact, this same tabloid wrote about Flight 915 in 3 separate reports, all of which contained serious information gaps and clear contradictions regarding dates and times. To give you an idea of the magnitude of these inconsistencies, the first article was published in 1985, claiming the aircraft had returned after an interval of only 30 years. Furthermore, the man identified as Juan de la Corte, who appears in all 3 articles, is shown with completely different photographs in the last 2 publications. The narrative eventually solidified as a sort of contemporary urban legend. Even though all evidence and technical data indicate we are looking at fake news, some people still add extra details, claiming the captain, or another crew member, dropped a small 1955 pocket calendar onto the Caracas runway when opening the cockpit hatch. So, what's your take on this mystery? Do you believe it is purely a work of fiction, or do you suspect it's a government cover-up? Share your opinion in the comments below. I'll wrap it up here. Big hug, and I'll see you in our next encounter.